Hello, everybody, and welcome to this new episode of How to Web Live. Developing technology products is not an easy task. You have to get right a lot of things, from discussing with your users, validating assumptions, to organizing your team. So our guest today, Marty Cagan, has been through them all. He is an accomplished ex-operator, being the VP of product both at Netscape and then eBay. He then launched Inspired, How to Build Products Customers Love, probably the most popular book on the planet on product development. Marty is also a consultant and advisor, a trainer, a prolific blogger, and a keynoter at various product-related conferences in the world. Through his work, he explained to all of us how to build products which are useful, what is product management, how to organize product teams, or what is the difference between a product manager and a project manager. Our host today, Dan Berte, he's a Chief Architect and IoT Director at Bitdefender and a product expert in itself. Dan has been involved with the developing of many Bitdefender products, most notably the box that we all know. So before kicking off, I want to say a big thank you to Bitdefender for powering this series and empowering our internet experience safety. Dan, Marty, welcome to How to Web Live. A pleasure to have you here.
And good afternoon to everybody who's joining us. I mean, I don't even know how to start a session with Marty Cagan. If people start saying, "Hey, he's a guru. If you haven't heard about him, he's fantastic. Why would you not know anything about Marty Cagan?" But I'm not gonna do that, because I'm sure every one of you who's here knows who Marty Cagan is. But you know, a founder and partner at Silicon Valley Product Group, graduate of University of California, Santa Cruz, with a degree in science and applied economics, author of Inspired, and soon to be released book Empowered. Former HP, Netscape, eBay, and a bunch of others. But that just doesn't do Marty justice. So Marty, if you may, just a couple of words about you, what you'd like us to.
Yeah, well, thanks again for inviting me, and for everybody who's tuning in to this. So yeah, I've just been working in the tech industry really my entire career since right out of college. I was very unusual for my generation because I learned to program when I was 7 years old, and that was not normal back then. But anyway, I think actually that was my head start, because I learned to code as a kid. I loved technology, and my father was a professor of computer science, so I had an unfair advantage, and I got introduced to a lot of the new technologies. I even met some of the people that created those new technologies, and so I just wanted to program when I was in college, and I started for the first 10 years of my career as a developer, as an engineer, working on tools for other developers. Still a favorite area of mine. But you know, over time, I got more interested not just in how do we build a great product, but I got interested in how do we decide what that product should be. Who decides that? How do they decide that? To me, that was even harder. I don't want to say, I mean, I've ended up, just because of curiosity really over the years, I wanted to learn design. I wanted to learn product marketing. I wanted to learn data analytics. I wanted to learn all these different parts of a product team. So most of the parts of a product team, I've had a chance to really play that role on product teams. And luckily, I was at companies early on in my career that encouraged people to learn other areas and encouraged, you know, had managers there to help you get better. So anyway, that just led me on a career. And in fairness, most of it was just luck at the right time, right place, because Netscape was really the original internet company, and some of the earliest developers were friends of mine. And so I got introduced, and I got to work for Mark Andreessen, and it was really the perfect place to be at that era, at the birth of the internet. And then through Netscape, I met all these startup founders, including Pierre Omidyar, who I ended up joining his company, eBay, early on. But more importantly, really, I made these friends with people that were starting. I mean, the people that started Google, that started Amazon, that started later, you know, Facebook and Twitter and Netflix. And so it was just a perfect place at the perfect time. And especially if you're interested, like I am, in the dynamics of what makes great product teams, what makes great products. Yeah, it's just been a fun ride, and I'm still riding it. It's been a long time. I mean, I've been doing this nonstop for nearly 40 years of just exclusively tech products. So yeah, when you do something that long, you get a lot of opinions about it, and I've been sharing those opinions to people who are willing to listen for a long time.
That's awesome. That's exactly what I'm trying to get out of today, and I know for a fact that everybody who's joined us is in the same boat. So we have an assortment of people who are anything from founders to professionals in different companies, large and small. We have product and innovation people. We have marketing people. We have your engineering people, and literally across the vertical space. So I'm happy. I was because howtoweb was a spectacle, is a festival of tech in that part of in our part of the world. So I'm sure a lot of people ask you what things people do wrong when it comes to product marketing, product management, maybe even product marketing for that matter, because they're all interrelated. But I'm going to try something else. So what's your favorite product management story, be it a product or a team or a service? Let's start with that. Any at all, like old or new, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I have lots of these stories. That's kind of what my favorite thing about the job is, because I've had a chance to know so many teams. I absolutely love the original Netflix story, the origin story of Netflix. I told that story in the book Inspired. I love the story, the origin story of Google AdWords, which was actually that's the product that makes Google like 90-something% of their money. Right. That's an amazing story. I love the AWS story, the Alexa story, iPhone story. These are all great product stories. You really can't find a successful product where there isn't a good story behind it, because these products are all hard. If they were easy, anybody could do them, but they're all hard. And I think what makes these stories so powerful is how the team overcame all the challenges. They were almost out of money, literally, at Netflix. At Google, the engineers and the salespeople were absolutely dead set against doing the product that eventually made the company as successful as it is. And these are normal obstacles that product teams have to overcome. And of course, what's amazing is how they overcome them. I mean, more recently, I can go for an hour just on this. What Airbnb did, they're just now going public. That's been an amazing success story and a great product story, great origin story. 3 co-founders that were awesome, are awesome. Slack, of course, has been a great story. No company has spread as fast around through enterprises as Slack has, and that's just a great story. I'm just trying to, in your part of, they're everywhere. These companies are everywhere. I'm just picking some companies that are kind of local for me, but there's great examples in London, great examples in Stockholm, everywhere today.
We're definitely gonna dive into that part of the world in a bit, and actually try to dissect whatever is different, or whatever opportunity there is that's special there. I've always wondered, actually. Of course, a lot of the good examples, people refer to Apple or products they've developed in the past, or products that they still develop. And I only have one question for you on this, actually, and I think it's going to help us understand your point of view on this. So, was Steve Jobs a product manager?
So, Apple's tricky. Steve Jobs definitely played a major product management role, but let's see where to start. On all the important things, Apple is just as good, in my opinion, as Amazon, as Netflix. So They are, but you have to realize Apple has three kinds of products, first of all, in their massive company, and they need to treat. So they do treat all three of those kind of products very differently. When people ask that question about Steve Jobs, we're really talking about things like this, right? We're talking about phones or computers. Right. And he did play a major product management. And in fact, on their product teams, it's really design and engineering. And the product management role is covered by the executives. Now, that's true on these multi-billion-dollar devices. And I would argue he was one of the best product managers that ever lived. So he understood the business constraints. And he was very good not at saying what the teams needed to fix. He was good at telling them when it wasn't good enough. So he had a very good understanding of the market, very good understanding of customers and what they really wanted. And that made him incredibly valuable. And I combined that, of course, with being very visionary. He had a very good sense of that fundamentally products were something where people would really want it, but was just now possible. And I mean, if you look at the arc on major Apple products, that's really what they've been about. And sometimes they've been too early, like the Newton was too early. Newton wasn't ready. The technology wasn't ready. Would it have been a successful product if it was ready? I think absolutely, but it was too early, wasn't ready. But on the other hand, the iPhone was just ready, just barely ready. In fact, most of the competitors thought it wasn't ready. That, for example, touchscreen technology was not ready for what Apple was about to do with it. But he had this vision that it was just about there. And if they get a little luck and a lot of effort, they could make it there. Now realize it took them 3.5 years of product discovery work to come up with the first iPhone. So this was not a small effort. But that was great. And by the way, Go ahead. I was just going to mention there's a good book that came out from the technical lead, one of the engineering tech leads on the iPhone, who was responsible for one of the hardest parts of the iPhone, which was text entry. And he wrote a book on, I believe. Ken Kacinda, yes. The book is called Creative Selection. So if anybody wants to hear an engineering perspective on the product discovery of the iPhone during the Steve Jobs era, that is a great account. I thought it was a very good account, and it's good for people to hear the engineering perspective, not just the design perspective or the product management perspective.
And that's great. That's exactly what I wanted us to get to, because my next question would be, and to your other examples about Netflix and eBay and Google, what drives these people? So I was kind of let down by Steve Jobs' biography. I don't think Walter Isaacson really understood the man. He had full access, but I don't think he understood what drove Steve Jobs to do what he did. Now, of course, he may have been abrasive and people never really always loved him, and there was all these things about him. But my question was that I never really understood what made him be who he was, what was his drive to do the things he did, and what is what do you think drives these people that are ultimately successful in product management or have the vision to do things?
I mean, for my part, I actually really did like that biography. I thought it captured a lot, and was pretty fair, for example. But to your question, well, first of all, I think it's fair to acknowledge that these leaders can be a great leader of a company in terms of make a lot of money, but there could be very different motivations. Some of the CEOs out there, I think, have terrible motivations. Their motivations are just greed, basically. They just want to make billions of dollars, and that's it. And other ones, of course, and I think Steve Jobs was a good example. And I think Jeff Bezos is a good example. Elon Musk, good example. They've already made more money than God, right? So it's not about the money, but I think and I think Steve Jobs was an authentic example of this. He wanted to use his time on Earth to try to make a dent in the universe. And he felt like he could do that by creating some amazing products. And I think that a lot of my favorite leaders, that is their motivation. They see that they could use technology to make something better. Now, sometimes they're a little naive about that. We all can be, I think, sometimes naive about that. Sometimes we think people are, we only look at the happy path. We only look at the customers that are going to use our technology to do great things. We don't always want to look at those people out there that might use our technology to do really not good things. So Facebook, for example. So
Right.
So not all leaders have the same sort of awareness and I think appreciation for ethics and unintended consequences. But for the most part, the most of the founders I meet really are excited about making a difference somehow. Even if it's really just in the lives of a set of users, they meet a set of users for something like finance, and they realize their life is just miserable. The software that they use every day is awful, and they want to improve their lives. That's a lot of them, and those, I think, I wish that was all of them, but there are, of course, some that have a very different motive, but we know that at this point.
Well, as a segue to this, and thanks for that. That's an excellent point. I want to remind everybody that we're going to discuss questions from the audience as well. So I'm going to encourage everybody who's following us to send us questions. I already have one. That's a good follow up to our current conversation. Anka Bundaru is sending us a question, and she's asking Marty, if any, what is the one thing you wish all product managers should know but don't?
Oh, that's a good and hard question. I mean, I will say as a general statement, most product managers in our industry, I'm talking worldwide, most of them have no idea how to do their job. So that is a huge problem in our industry. And that's usually because the only training they've ever had is a CSPO class. What they are is a product owner, not a product manager. They know how to play the role of a product owner on an agile team, which is, of course, a tiny part of the product management job. So we have a huge issue in our industry. And I honestly will go further, because most of the product teams I meet, the engineers are not the problem. Most of them are good. The designers are not usually the problem, but the product managers are most often the problem. So yeah, we have a real issue there. What do I wish they should know but don't is how to do product management. That's what I really wish. Now, specifically, if I could change one thing, even if we only looked at serious product managers, the people who are really committed to their job and are willing to put the time and effort in to doing their job well. Even if we just look at them, the biggest thing I would like to change, and I wish I really had said this 20 years ago, that's when I think it should have been more loudly said, is ethics. What we were talking about before, ethics. Ethics is not, you can't blame all the problems in our industry on the product managers. Really, the real guilt is on the leaders of those companies. However, I would admit that the product managers are usually the first ones to see problems that are starting, that are brewing. And I would love to see more product managers first of all, be more aware of those ethical issues, and then have the skills and the courage to escalate those issues and really bring them down and bring them to the leaders and say, here's what I think is going to happen if we continue on this. I know this is not what we intended, but what I think is going to happen is our product will be used by these bad people, or our product will cause this problem in the environment, or whatever. And I think we can do this in a better way that doesn't have those bad consequences.
And I agree. That was harsh to call to call most of product managers unprepared for it. So actually, that's a huge opportunity. It's harsh, but it's true, I guess, in many ways. So, is product management a function of culture?
Well,
and what I mean by that,
yeah,
not necessarily the corporate culture, more like culture, like
You mean country culture, like
country
in,
culture, yeah, geography culture.
okay. That's a fun question, for example. And in fact, there's a new book out called The Culture Map that I'm in the middle of reading right now. I heard about it from people at Netflix. It's a good book so far on this topic, exactly about how the cultures around the world. I would say, in my experience, and I have not gone everywhere in the world, obviously, but I love meeting teams in different parts of the world, and I've been in about 30 different countries with product teams. Most of them around the world, I find when it comes to product, there's no issue. We're all basically got the same things that are important. There are a few things that there are no question. For example, I have struggled for years in Japan because good products to me require real collaboration and real debate. And it doesn't really matter what the person's level is. In Japan, that is very difficult to get somebody to do. Culturally, it's very difficult. It's rude. It's not something they're used to. And so I have struggled to try to get the kind of collaboration we need in the Japanese culture. There are brilliant people there, and I'm optimistic that the youngest people right now just entering the workforce don't have as many of these worries as their parents did. But Japan is tough. You're in or Eastern Europe. In a lot of Europe, especially in the East, one of the things I do work, I don't want to say this is a problem. It's more like I find myself coaching teams in that part of the world on this topic, which is, and I'll just throw it out there. Hopefully people know I'm not trying to insult anybody. I'm just trying to share some of these observations. There is a predisposition to process. So I meet so many teams that really love process. And process is dangerous, especially if you use it as a crutch. In fact, Jeff Bezos at Amazon is scared to death of process. He refers to it as day two behavior. He likes to say, be careful that process does not become the thing, where you get teams so focused on the process and they forget the customers, they forget the product. And they're just focused on process. I see that problem a lot. And so a little bit of process, not a problem. But the kind of process that a lot of people do is just deadly. Yeah, so you have to be careful.
So you've I assume you've worked with some product managers in Eastern Europe before, and you're somewhat familiar with the vagaries of the space and how people do things. So, this question can't be asked enough. I'm going to try to dispel some of the myths. I know working with people across the pond both ways, there's still a sort of a admiration and envy for companies and product managers and startups in Silicon Valley. And it's always been like that, and it's natural and normal. But is there a magic sauce? Is there something about the talent here or a secret ingredient in Silicon Valley that's, a reality that would never apply to Europe or Eastern Europe? So just to get it off the bat, what do you think you would tell everybody back in, Central and Eastern Europe, maybe on their position on the world map for a potential to be in that space as well?
Yeah, well, first of all, for a long time, even companies based in Silicon Valley or Seattle or New York, a lot of times our best engineers are in Estonia, they're in Romania, they're in Hungary, they're all over. So that has not been a problem. If there was one thing I could change around Europe in general, if there was one thing, if I had the power to make a law, which I can't, but I would say, it's much harder in most of Europe to give employees stock ownership than it is in the US. And this is actually a very important thing that not enough people talk about. And this is a little bit cultural, but in good companies anywhere in the world, I would argue, anywhere in the world, the people who work there, especially product managers, they think like owners, not like employees. And it is very easy to tell when you meet somebody who thinks like an employee. The official word for this is they have a sense of agency, means like they feel like this is theirs. Though Bezos says every year, the easiest, we need our people, especially product managers, to think like owners. The easiest way to do that is to make them owners. That's why we give them all stock options. We want them to be a part owner in the company. And, there are other ways to do it. You can do profit sharing plans. There are other ways, but too many times in European companies, I meet companies where the employees, the people that work there, have no financial, other than being paid every month. They don't get any long-term tie to the success of the company. And they feel like just an employee rather than an owner. And that, I think, is a real problem, a limitation.
We're going to take a break for a minute in a short while, and I would like to discuss this further and actually develop on it, because I think it's a great point that I expected a totally different answer. I think it's fantastic. So I'm going to take one more question before we pause for a minute from Sebastian Coquinescu, and he's asking, what would be the best approach when delivering new products? He's asking what it takes to create a new market, a need, or address an existing problem. So I guess, and I've also prepared a question on this. So thank you, Sebi. This is fantastic. When do you know you have the market fit? I guess what he's trying to ask. So.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say that it's very rare, actually, that you are creating a new market and need. And I would also say it is very expensive to do that. I know a lot of startups have tried, and what they end up doing is not going anywhere until a big company like Microsoft or Google develops the market with their billions, and then they have a solution. So 99% of the time, your product is not a new market. It is not a new need. It's a better solution to an existing need. And that applies, by the way, you look at Google Search was that way. If you look at the iPhone was that way, the iPad was that way, all of these products, they are rarely a new need. They are an old need with a much better solution. In other words, now the solution is just now possible. So that's where you really want to focus most of the time. The market is there. They just need a much better solution.
Awesome. We're gonna go for a 1 minute break and come back, and we're gonna continue with the questions. So just a quick reminder to everybody who's following us: please send us more questions, and we're asking Marty. We're asking to Marty. So we'll see you in a bit.
To use advanced analytical techniques and to train the algorithms to address specific problems.
Our story began in 2001 with a brave plan to secure every bit there was. The momentum Bitdefender has built over time grew exponentially in more than 150 countries. The core were our pioneering products, proving themselves reliable and innovative time and time again. Millions of people across the globe trust our technology to keep them safe on a daily basis, whether they're at home, in the office, or on the go. Providing innovation and unmatched services for our customers is our duty.
All right, we're back. So I want to go back to talking about the specifics and the opportunities of the Central and Eastern European market for product management and startups, and just becoming a hub. So you've known the space, you've worked with this part of the world before. So like you said, it's famous for its and fortunate for its talent in engineering. That's why there's so many Fortune 500 companies that have development centers down there. That's why also that so many outsourcing companies that have just basically churned out code in droves for Western markets. Now, when you have this fantastic resource pool of fantastic engineers, and I've heard you say this many times, that engineers actually foster innovation more often than product managers or designers, what have you. How do you turn this industry from a resource pool into a product development hub? And I think you already touched on a couple of ideas of how, but let's get more into it maybe.
Yeah. And probably the best country in the world I've seen make that transformation from just outsourced engineering basically to US companies, German companies, wherever, to creating their own products is Israel. They have had, exceptional engineers really from all around the world come there. But they do more than just great engineering. They have done, many great products. India has also, for a long time, India was just, that's where the outsourced engineers were. But my favorite companies in India are not outsourcing companies at all. They are the ones that are creating their own products for India, which of course is a massive country in its own right, with over 1 billion people, but also in many cases now for the world. Same thing has happened in China. The same thing's happening in Brazil. So I absolutely encourage companies and countries to not just provide the engineering, but to really provide whole products. And just, you didn't ask this, but if it was up to me, the whole idea of outsourcing engineers would be dead. That's just a terrible idea.
Did you call them mercenaries?
You're an engineer. Sorry, go ahead. Say that again.
Did you call them mercenaries at one time?
Yeah, that's why they're mercenaries. And if you are an engineer working at an outsourcing firm, get a job as an engineer working on an actual team where you are a full member of the team. That because as an outsourcing firm, they can only leverage a small % of your brain.
Right. So it doesn't matter geographically exactly entirely where you are. It doesn't matter the culture you come from. As long as you get ownership in the company that work in, and you feel like you're part of the solution and part of the beneficiary of the results of your work and the company's work, if it's a startup or a larger company, and as long as you have some decent training for a product manager, be it formal or informal, it should be good to go regardless of the fact that you're in Estonia, Romania, or Brazil, right? It should kind of be.
Yeah, I was saying that even 20 years ago, but the difference is today there are thousands of successful companies all over the world. It is not something that's just in Silicon Valley. And to be honest, there's no room in Silicon Valley anymore anyway. So companies have no choice. Even if their headquarters is in San Francisco, they've had to open remote offices. And of course, that was even before the pandemic. The pandemic has just exacerbated that. So there's just not enough room in San Francisco, Seattle, New York, and London for all the companies to be. So they go where the talent is. There's great talent all over the world. And one of the nice things about the pandemic, I think, is that it pushed companies to the point where they realize, we can hire this talent anywhere. That's the advantage. They don't have to live in the same city as the company headquarters. They can be anywhere. There are still advantages if they can be near their designer and their engineer, but if they can be together, but they could be in Bucharest, they could be in wherever, and do amazing work. And that's, I mean, I think that's the story of, the next 20, 30 years.
I mean, you've been a fantastic proponent and a big supporter of the idea of being co-located and working together on things to solve problems, work on prototypes instead of, writing down specs and just sending them over to somebody who's going to work on them and so on. So, and I'm with you on that. As a product manager myself, I feel disconnected when I'm not in the same room to work with people and things. But that's what we have to do sometimes, especially during this pandemic. So I kind of want to touch on those things, and we'll take some more questions from the audience. But how has this year been for you, and what was the biggest takeaway about working? I mean, we've had examples of companies that have done successful remote work. A few come to mind, like 37 Signals and others have always done things like this, and they never had a hub. And what's your gist of it? I'm sure you've talked about this many times, and other people are just yapping about it. But what's your take on this year and the upcoming year as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been a mixed bag for sure. And I can tell you that the leaders of the best companies, I mean, whether you're talking Reed Hastings at Netflix or Bezos at Amazon, they can't wait for the pandemic to be over, because the level of innovation has not been what it was. So, and that's another harsh truth. Now, the real question is why, and what can we do to fix that? That's the real question. But I don't think anybody serious tries to argue that innovation has certainly gone up, or even held constant. Now, to me, the reason why is because every product team really does two things. They're doing discovery work and delivery work. And in truth, delivery work doesn't suffer from remote working from home. In fact, there is, of course, an important caveat I always have to remind myself to say. Working from home is terrible if you are unfortunately stuck being, childcare, homeschooling. If you have, those people have no time for anything, and they're under terrible stress today. So those people, we have to be understanding of the stresses those people are under. But let's say it's just an engineer living alone, and they're working from home versus working in an office. You know what? There's an argument in many teams I've found that delivery is even better because there are less interruptions. Now, discovery is a different story. Discovery is what's suffering in the pandemic, not delivery, because discovery is not a divide and conquer activity like delivery is. Discovery is a collaborative activity. And so that sitting together around a prototype and debating it for hours on end, that's much harder to do when we're dispersed. And that's been true. That's why the vast majority of innovative companies are not distributed because of that. And the few that are successful distributed, most of them are really delivery centric. They are meaning that it's not about what they do, it's about can they build a scalable, low cost implementation of that, and many of them have. But so it is harder to do collaboration when you're working from home. And there's good research out there now about the reasons why, but it doesn't really help us much. It just shines a light on, this is the problem. There are ways we can mitigate the issues, and a lot of this falls on the managers, but one of them is trust. It's very hard to have the kind of dialogues you need to have when you don't have those personal relationships. And those, even if you had the personal relationships, and many people they're interviewing and starting new jobs having never met in person the company or the team. They've never even gone to the office. They've never met anybody face to face. So it's all remote. So the bad side is they don't have those relationships to leverage. But even though people that do, they've worked together for 5 years before, but now they're working from home, those relationships start to deteriorate because because people who would never say something this way in person find themselves on email or on Slack, not worrying about how they phrase something, and people are offended and they're not talking about it. And pretty soon, you realize I'm working with jerks, and nobody wants to really collaborate that way. So there are some serious challenges with work from home. It requires the managers to play a much more active coaching role. And by the way, this is just one of many topics I've written about these, and other people have too. But that's really what's going on, and which is I of course, obviously we all want the pandemic to end, but what I expect will happen after the pandemic is, one, we will continue with people working remotely forever.
Right.
Because the access to talent is so valuable. However, we will see teams getting together in local offices all over the world for a few days a week, that kind of thing. We'll see them come together at times and then work remotely at times, because they'll have a healthier balance between the discovery and the delivery work.
So Carl Jennings is asking, what role do communications play in these processes, and where is it more critical? And this is a loaded question. It sounds simple, but it isn't. So I think it kind of plays into what you were just saying. So figuring out a method of...
this is, the truth is, we have to communicate for everything we do. This is not a secret, but the nature of communication is much more intense for discovery than it is for delivery. And so communication plays a big role, obviously, in discovery. And that's why one of the things I keep pushing the teams I'm coaching to do for their discovery work, even though they don't really want to do a Zoom call, I tell them, do a daily Zoom call. Make sure you have video on with your designer, with your tech lead, at least every day. Even though it's a pain, because we really need to keep nurturing that communication dynamic, for example. So there's no question. But, the communication has never really been the issue. We had Skype long before the pandemic, right? Skype was all over, the world. It's not about the communication. It's really about the collaboration. So that's a much harder problem than communication.
Interesting. And actually, it reminds me of the previous downturns that we had when travel was just ground to a halt and everybody switched to Skype, and they thought it was going to be fine for about a year, and then everybody else just started recongregating because it was just tough to keep up. So yes, I will take your point on using more video with my teams as well. That's a excellent point, because we kind of phased that one out at some point. Anita is asking us, she says, product managers are heavily involved in the product discovery process. And to what extent do you think they should be involved in the product delivery process and actual solutioning?
Okay, well, the first thing I got to correct is, because there's a big assumption in that statement that is just very far off. In other words, the implication there is solutioning is something that's part of delivery, which is so far off the truth. The solutioning is the heart of discovery. Discovery includes both understanding the problem and coming up with a solution. In fact, the heart of discovery is coming up with a solution that is valuable, usable, feasible, viable. That requires product managers, real product managers, not CSPO product owners, real product managers. It requires real product designers, and it requires your engineers. That is how we come up with solutions. So that is the heart. If you can't do that, look, most products fail, not because there's no market. Most products fail because the solution the team came up with is not good enough to get people to switch. So that is the heart of discovery, not delivery. Delivery is, once you know that solution, you have evidence that's something that's going to work. We have to build a reliable, scalable, high performance, fault tolerant solution. That's delivery. And obviously, product managers and designers still will answer questions that the engineers identify, usually around use cases that weren't thought through, but there's always some questions. But so product management and product design have a small role to play in delivery, but that is, primarily engineering. Their primary job is discovery, which absolutely is based around solutioning. So I hope that makes sense to Anita, because that is a really fundamental misunderstanding. And I have met lots of people that have that confusion.
Excellent. And actually, Cosmin is asking, what are the characteristics of what characteristics are you searching for in a perfect product designer? Because most of us have the fundamentals but are struggling to stand out. What else should what else should product managers know other than CPO training? What are the fundamental things they should cover?
Okay,
so again, going back to these.
The first question was about the designers, right?
Product designers, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because they're very different jobs. We can talk about each. They're both critical jobs for sure. So let's talk about the product designer first. When we say product designer, that's just sort of a loose term. There's a lot of, but the key is there are a real product designer is somebody who's trained, knowledgeable in service design, interaction design, visual design, and user research. Okay, now it doesn't mean they're an expert in all four of those areas. A typical product designer, their strength is primarily around interaction design, and they have good skills in service design. They have basic competencies in visual design, and they've all been trained in the fundamentals of user research. That's a typical product designer. Those people are awesome. And, I will tell you that companies like Amazon, Google, Netflix, they hire these people as fast as they can. They are, they're worth gold to teams. So it's not, there 10 years ago, we had a huge shortage of these people. Today, because there are so many more programs that create these real designers, it's not as bad as it used to be. There are really good education programs. There are online education programs for these. So product designer, they are your partner to product managers. They're right there. They spend their day, they design via prototypes. They're creating most of the prototypes we use in discovery. Yeah, it's a great and critical role. And I want to be clear, we're not talking a graphic designer here. We are talking a real product designer.
Excellent point.
Okay. Then to Bogdan's question.
So Bogdan was asking,
about what else should product managers know other than CSPO? So it's just to be clear, everybody should take a certified Scrum product owner class. I recommend that. It's super easy. It only takes a few hours. You should do that, but don't kid yourself. That teaches you less than 10% of the job of a product manager. It teaches you basically how the process works of typical Scrum or Kanban, and it teaches you how to do the backlog administration responsibility. But this is not the job, right? This is not the job. Just like teaching an engineer how to work on an agile team is this much. Teaching them how to code is years, right? That's the difference. Okay, so what else do they need to know? Well, there's a lot that they need to know. I wrote a book about what they need to know. It's called Inspired. It talks about the techniques that a competent product manager needs to have. We have many, many different techniques, some techniques for framing and digging deeper into the problem. Most of the techniques are around coming up with a good solution. We have quantitative techniques, we have qualitative techniques, and I want to be clear, none of that is covered in CSPO training. So yes, you should go to CSPO training. Does that make you even remotely qualified to be a product manager? Not even close. So the way you learn that, you can go to training for real product managers, but most people learn it from a manager that knows how to do the job. And this is actually the problem in most companies. The problem is their manager has never seen good. They have never seen product done well. They have never done it themselves well. And so they can't teach their people that. I learned it from somebody who was awesome, that was willing to teach me. Almost everybody who's good that I know learned it from someone who was willing to coach them. This is why I tell leaders, product leaders, that their primary responsibility is coaching their people to learn how to do their job well.
Which leads me to pick Raluca's question. She is throwing an oddball to, she's asking what makes the difference between a good product manager and a great product manager. Which actually, I don't even know if we have time to cover. It might take us a couple of hours, but we're going to go through that. And I have another question from the audience as well that we want to go for before our time runs out.
Well, I mean, I would, good to great is a good question, but really what we're talking about is terrible to good. That's what we've been talking about, terrible to good. If all you are is a CSPO trained product owner, then that's terrible. And then what we're really talking about, okay, your team needs a competent product manager. What gets you to good? We can also talk about good to great, but that is, now we're really talking about people who really understand how to leverage the insights in the data, that are really skilled at the techniques, that are comfortable tackling the hardest problems, that know how to work closely with engineering and design and executives. So that's another discussion. But most product teams, that's not the discussion right now. And the managers are just trying to get their product owners to good.
So are product managers relegated to the role of delivering to the role of individual contributors, or are they going to make it out there? Is that even a thing?
A product manager, like I'm describing, is an individual contributor. They are on a product team. Everybody on a product team is an individual contributor, the designer, the engineers, but we work together to solve hard problems. Now, a product owner is so far away from a CEO, it would be ridiculous. And in fact, if you've ever heard that a good product manager is the CEO of their product, that is not talking about a product owner. That is talking about a serious product manager of an empowered product team. And that is because in a real product team, the real product manager is responsible for value and viability. The designer, of course, is accountable for usability, and the engineers for feasibility, but the product manager is responsible for value and viability. And in a startup, that's the CEO's responsibility, value and viability. That's why real product management is such a good way to prepare yourself for a startup CEO job.
And I think we got time to take like one more question. And I'm looking at Maris's, and he's asking, what's your view on the setup in which discovery and delivery are split between different individuals? For example, having both a product manager and a product owner on the team. And I know you're very vocal about the roles here, so I'd like.
Yeah, no, that's a terrible anti-pattern. Whenever you see that, you know that it is almost impossible to innovate, first of all. But as a general principle, we never want to do that. There's a lot of reasons for this. Now, my guess, unfortunately, Marius might work in one of those terrible processes I was describing before. I didn't mention it, but the classic example of terrible is SAFe, if you know that process, Scaled Agile Framework, which is not agile in any way. That's just marketing. But in that model, they separate the product management and product ownership. But that's because they don't depend. It is not about innovation at all. It is just about shipping features. So when you separate those two, like Marius is describing, a lot of bad things happen. First of all, there's one team that is responsible for figuring things out. Another team is just there to shut up and code. And that is not what we want. Like I said, the major innovations come from the engineers knowing what's just now possible. So the last thing you want to do is separate those two. We could just leave it at that. Don't do that. You should have one person that is the product manager that covers the product owner responsibilities. That is really important. And if that's not something you want to do, then you don't have much of a chance, I think, in a real product company.
Awesome. One last question, and that will conclude our questions that we can take. Actually, Jen was asking, at Metro Digital, we have product teams, but also feature and delivery teams. We also use OKRs. As you might imagine, we have some difficulties with OKRs and feature delivery teams. We take into consideration stopping OKRs for teams that are not empowered and autonomous. What would you do? Stop OKRs or keep pushing and support them to become more empowered and autonomous? Very practical.
Yeah, OKRs are a ridiculous waste of time if you're a feature team or delivery team. They'll be ignored anyway. So you can do whatever you want, it won't matter. Because when you give teams a roadmap, that's like the opposite of OKRs. And so they're going to ignore the OKRs. So don't waste your time is my advice. OKRs were designed for and birthed from companies that were in the other model, the empowered product team model. So lots of companies have tried to use OKRs on their feature teams. What's the point of this? They get nothing out of it. And so, yeah, I wouldn't waste your time. Now, the real question is, does your business depend on innovation? If it does, then I would argue you need to get serious about product. If not, if you're a bank, for example, where you got plenty of money no matter what you do because your government's controlling most of this stuff, then do whatever you want. But if you are dependent on, if you're eventually competing against the Amazons of the world, then you got to build the same skills they have.
I think we're out of time, but I mean, I know everybody who's been with us would love to have a couple more hours, and I would too. There's so much to learn and so much to exchange with you, Marty. It's been great. It's been a pleasure. So I want to thank you for the time and taking these questions and being raw about things, so people can actually take some cues on how to improve on their process and on their performance. And at the same time, I want to thank everybody who's been joining us and sending us amazing questions. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time. Marty, it's a great pleasure and a great honor.
All right, everybody. I hope you had a great time. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for joining us. For more episodes, visit our social media channels or our website. Until next time, stay curious.